The rattling windows of the stagecoach couldn't drown out the thunder of Lillian Neal's heartbeat as she clutched her father's letter, the words blurring before her eyes as tears threatened to spill. Colorado Territory, 1872. This desolate frontier would be her salvation and her prison, all because of 5 devastating words scratched in her father's dying hand. "Marry Caleb Xavier," he promised. Dust swirled around the stagecoach as it rolled into Silver Creek, a town barely clinging to existence on the edge of the untamed frontier. Lillian's gloved hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her traveling hat, the small feather adornment now bent from the long journey. The driver called out that they had arrived, his voice carrying an air of finality that matched the leaden feeling in her stomach. "Silver Creek," the driver announced, pulling the team of horses to a stop. "End of the line, madam." Lillian gathered her belongings, 2 modest trunks containing everything she had managed to salvage after her father's creditors had taken almost everything else. The banker's daughter from Boston was now nothing more than a desperate woman with nowhere else to turn. As she stepped down from the coach, her boots met the packed dirt of the main street. Silver Creek was nothing like Boston, a single dusty street lined with wooden buildings, most looking as though they were held together by little more than hope and stubborn determination. Horses stood hitched to posts while men in worn clothing moved about with purpose, barely glancing at the new arrival. "Miss Neal," Lillian turned to find a tall man approaching. His face was partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat, but she could see a strong jaw dusted with stubble. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn leather vest, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and harsh country. "Yes, I am Lillian Neal," she confirmed, straightening her spine and lifting her chin, determined not to show weakness despite her circumstances. "Caleb Xavier," he replied, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. "I'm sorry about your father." His words carried genuine sympathy, though his expression remained guarded. She noted calloused hands and sun-weathered skin. This was no soft city gentleman but a man forged by the frontier. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier. Your correspondence indicated you would meet me," she replied formally, though her heart raced with uncertainty. This stranger would be her husband within days, a man she knew only through the handful of letters exchanged after her father's death. "Let me get your trunks," he said, moving to collect her belongings. "The wagon's just over there." He loaded her trunks with ease, then offered his hand to help her climb onto the wooden seat of the simple farm wagon. His touch was brief but firm, practical rather than tender. As they began to move away from the town, Lillian clutched her reticule tightly, the papers inside containing the marriage agreement that would secure her future. "It's about an hour to the ranch," Caleb said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Silver Creek isn't much, but it's the closest town." "I come in for supplies every couple of weeks," Lillian nodded, taking in the vast landscape spreading before them. Rolling hills dotted with scrub brush gave way to distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the spring season. The immensity of the open space made her feel small and exposed after the crowded streets of Boston. "Your father was good to me when I was starting out," Caleb said after several minutes of silence. "Loaned me the money to buy my first cattle when no bank would touch me. I was sorry to hear of his passing." "He spoke of you," Lillian said carefully. "He said you were honorable and hardworking." A muscle twitched in Caleb's jaw. "I try to be. When I heard about his death and your situation, I knew I had to honor my promise to him." "Which was?" Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "To look after you if anything happened to him. He worried about you being alone." Lillian turned to look at the man who would soon be her husband. His profile was stern, almost carved from stone. "Let me be clear, Mr. Xavier. I understand this arrangement perfectly. My father's debts left me with nothing. You need someone to keep your house and bear your name. This marriage is for convenience, nothing more." Something flickered in Caleb's eyes as he turned to meet her gaze. For a moment, she glimpsed something that might have been hurt before his expression hardened. "Not for my heart," he replied, his voice low and rough as the terrain around them. "That's not part of our arrangement." The wagon fell silent as they continued their journey, the distance between them measured not just in inches but in the gulf of their separate expectations. Lillian stared straight ahead, willing herself not to cry. She had made her choice survival over sentiment. Love was a luxury she could no longer afford. As the wagon crested a hill, Caleb gestured toward a valley below. "That's the Double X Ranch." Nestled in the valley was a modest but well-maintained ranch house with several outbuildings. A corral held horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on green pastures. It was beautiful in its rugged simplicity, so different from the ornate townhouse she had grown up in. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," Caleb said, misinterpreting her silence. "But it's good land." "Productive? It's lovely," Lillian replied honestly. "More substantial than I expected." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "Your father's investment paid off. I've been able to expand over the years." As they approached the ranch, Lillian noticed a woman emerge from the house, wiping her hands on an apron. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. "That's Mrs. Holloway," Caleb explained. "She's been keeping house for me. Lives in town with her son, but comes out here most days." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Mrs. Holloway approached with a warm smile that eased some of Lillian's tension. "You must be Miss Neal," she said. "Welcome to Double X. I've got supper almost ready and your room prepared." "Thank you," Lillian replied, grateful for the woman's kindness. "Mrs. Holloway will show you around," Caleb said, already unloading her trunks. "I need to check on a sick calf in the north pasture before dark." Without waiting for a response, he carried her trunks into the house and then strode toward the barn, leaving Lillian standing uncertainly beside the wagon. "Don't mind him, dear," Mrs. Holloway said gently. "He's not one for many words, but he's a good man." "I'm sure he is," Lillian replied, though she wasn't sure of anything anymore. Mrs. Holloway led her into the house. The main room was larger than expected, with a stone fireplace and simple but sturdy furniture. A bookshelf lined one wall, surprisingly full of volumes. "The kitchen's through here," Mrs. Holloway explained, leading her through the house. "Mr. Xavier added on to the original cabin about 3 years ago. Your room is down this hall. He built a proper bedroom for you just last month after he received your letter agreeing to come." Lillian felt a flush of something like gratitude as she followed Mrs. Holloway into a small but pleasant bedroom. A bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall, a washstand with a porcelain basin beside it. A window looked out toward the mountains, and a small vase of wildflowers sat on the dresser. "He picked those this morning," Mrs. Holloway said with a knowing smile, "though he'd likely deny it if asked." Lillian touched the delicate purple blossoms, surprised by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "The wedding's set for Saturday," Mrs. Holloway continued. "Pastor Williams will come out from town. Just a simple ceremony, Mr. Xavier said." "Yes, that's what we agreed upon in our letters," Lillian confirmed, her stomach tightening at the reality of her situation. 3 days until she would marry a stranger. When Mrs. Holloway left her to unpack and refresh herself before supper, Lillian sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed a few tears to fall. She wasn't a romantic girl with dreams of passionate love. Her father's marriage to her mother had cured her of such notions. She had seen firsthand how her mother had wilted under her father's indifference, dying young and heartbroken. Still, she had hoped for more than this, a marriage based on her father's debts and a promise between men. She wiped her tears away resolutely. She would make the best of this situation. She had skills. She could keep books, manage a household, and be a proper partner. If not a love match, perhaps they could build something based on mutual respect. By the time she heard Caleb return to the house, Lillian had composed herself and changed into a simple blue dress, one of the few she had managed to keep. She pinned her honey-brown hair neatly and practiced a pleasant expression in the small mirror above her washstand. Supper was a quiet affair, with Mrs. Holloway carrying most of the conversation. She spoke of the town, the neighbors scattered across the valley, and the upcoming spring social at the newly built schoolhouse. "Will you be staying tonight, Mrs. Holloway?" Lillian asked as they finished the meal. "No, dear, Mr. Xavier will drive me back to town shortly." "My son would worry if I didn't return." She glanced between Lillian and Caleb. "Of course, it wouldn't be proper for you two to be here alone before the wedding, but my nephew Thomas is staying in the bunkhouse. He works for Mr. Xavier, and there are 2 other ranch hands out there as well." Lillian felt relief wash over her. At least she wouldn't be completely alone with Caleb until after they were married. When Mrs. Holloway left to gather her things, Lillian found herself alone with Caleb for the first time since their arrival. "The room is lovely," she said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "Thank you for preparing it for me," Caleb nodded, his expression unreadable. "I want you to be comfortable here." "Mr. Xavier, Caleb," he corrected. "If we're to be married in 3 days, you should use my given name." "Caleb," she amended. "I want you to know that I understand my role here. I will work hard to be a good wife in the practical sense. I can keep books, manage the household, and help with whatever is needed." "I don't expect you to be a servant, Lillian," he replied, her name sounding different in his deep voice. "This is a partnership. Your father believed in what I was building here, and I owe him everything I have. The least I can do is provide you with security and a home, and children." Lillian asked bluntly, needing to understand the full extent of his expectations. Color rose in Caleb's cheeks, but he held her gaze steadily. "In time, perhaps, if that's what you want as well, but nothing will happen that you don't consent to." The honesty in his words surprised her. She had expected demands, not consideration. "Thank you for your candor," she said formally. "I appreciate knowing where we stand." "Where we stand," he repeated, something like resignation in his tone. "Yes, I suppose that's important, Mrs." Holloway returned, and Caleb excused himself to hitch the wagon. As Lillian watched him walk away, his shoulders straight and steps purposeful, she wondered what kind of man had agreed to marry a stranger out of duty to her father. And she wondered, with a flutter of uncertainty, what kind of life they would build together in this wild, beautiful place. The next morning, Lillian woke at dawn, the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch pulling her from sleep. She dressed quickly in a practical skirt and shirtwaist, then made her way to the kitchen. To her surprise, Caleb was already there, coffee brewing on the stove. "Good morning," he said, looking up from the papers spread before him on the table. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, though in truth she had tossed and turned for hours, her mind filled with uncertainty about her future. "Coffee," he offered, already moving to pour her a cup. "Please." She accepted the steaming mug gratefully. "Mrs. Holloway won't be coming today." "Not until later. Thursdays she helps her daughter-in-law with laundry in town." He gestured to the papers. "I was just going over the ranch accounts." Lillian hesitated, then asked, "May I see? My father taught me bookkeeping." Surprise flickered across his face, but he nodded and pushed the ledger toward her. Lillian studied the neat columns of figures, impressed by the organization. "You keep excellent records," she commented. "Your father insisted I learn proper accounting before he would invest in my operation," Caleb explained. "Said a man who doesn't know where his money goes won't have it for long." "That sounds like him," Lillian said, a small smile touching her lips at the memory of her father's practical wisdom. Caleb watched her for a moment. "You can take over the books if you'd like. I won't object to the help." "I would like that," she replied, genuinely pleased to have a way to contribute. "It would give me purpose." Something in her words made his expression soften slightly. "You don't need to prove your worth here, Lillian. Your presence is enough." Before she could respond to this unexpected statement, the door opened and a young man entered. "Morning, boss," he called, then stopped short when he saw Lillian. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. Thomas, this is Miss Lillian Neal," Caleb introduced. "Lillian, this is Thomas Holloway, Mrs. Holloway's nephew and one of my ranch hands." Thomas removed his hat hastily. "Pleasure to meet you, madam. We've been looking forward to your arrival." "Thank you, Mr. Holloway," Lillian replied politely. "We've got that fence line to repair in the south pasture," Caleb said to Thomas. "Tell Jim and Pete to get the supplies loaded while I finish breakfast." When Thomas had gone, Lillian rose to explore the kitchen. "I can prepare something for breakfast," she offered. "You don't have to, I want to," she interrupted firmly. "If this is to be my home, I should start acting as if it is." Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Eggs are in the pantry, bacon too." As Lillian set about preparing breakfast, she felt Caleb's eyes on her occasionally. There was something comforting about performing this simple domestic task, giving her hands something to do while her mind processed the dramatic changes in her circumstances. "What do you think of the ranch so far?" Caleb asked as they sat down to eat. "It's beautiful," she answered honestly. "Different from anything I've known, but beautiful in its own way." "It can be harsh too," he warned. "Winters are hard, summers can bring drought. It takes grit to make it out here." "Do you think I lack grit, Mr. Xavier?" Lillian asked, raising an eyebrow. A small smile, the first she had seen from him, lifted one corner of his mouth. "No, madam. A woman who travels across the country alone to marry a stranger has grit to spare." After breakfast, Caleb showed her around the ranch before he needed to join his men. The tour was practical rather than romantic. He showed her the smokehouse, the chicken coop, the root cellar where vegetables were stored. He explained the water system he had devised to bring creek water close to the house and the improvements he planned for the coming year. "I want to build a proper porch across the front," he said, gesturing to the simple stoop currently serving that purpose. "Somewhere to sit in the evenings and watch the sunset." The image of them sitting together on a porch in the evening struck Lillian as oddly intimate, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That would be lovely," she managed to say. When Caleb left to work, Lillian spent the day familiarizing herself with the house and its contents. She found the pantry well stocked, the linens clean and neatly folded, and everything in good repair. Mrs. Holloway had clearly taken pride in maintaining Caleb's home. In the afternoon, she discovered a small garden plot behind the house, already turned for spring planting. A few early herbs and greens were sprouting in neat rows. Kneeling in the soft earth, Lillian felt a connection to this place beginning to form, tentative roots seeking purchase in unfamiliar soil. Mrs. Holloway arrived later with a bundle of fabric. "For your wedding dress," she explained. "Nothing fancy but a pretty cream-colored cotton. I thought we could sew it tomorrow." Touched by the woman's thoughtfulness, Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. "That's very kind of you. Every bride deserves something special, even for a practical arrangement," Mrs. Holloway said gently. That evening, supper was a livelier affair with Thomas and the other two ranch hands joining them at the table. Jim Collins was older, with gray threading his beard and laugh lines around his eyes. Pete Simmons was barely 20, with freckles across his nose and a tendency to blush when Lillian addressed him directly. The men discussed the day's work and plans for the following day, occasionally explaining things to Lillian when she asked questions. She found herself genuinely interested in the operation of the ranch, and her questions seemed to please Caleb, who answered at length about his breeding program for the cattle and his hopes for expanding the herd. After the meal, while Mrs. Holloway washed the dishes despite Lillian's protests, Caleb approached her with a small wooden box. "I have something for you," he said, his voice lower than usual. "It's not much, but—" Inside the box was a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I thought you might want something for the ceremony." Lillian stared at the ring, unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Are you certain you want me to have it?" "She would have wanted you to have it," he said simply. "She always said a marriage needed symbols as well as substance." "Were your parents happy?" Lillian asked before she could stop herself. Caleb's expression softened with memory. "Yes, they had their struggles. Life out here ensures that, but they faced them together. They taught me what partnership means." Lillian thought of her own parents' marriage, her father distant and demanding, her mother wilting under his criticism until illness took her when Lillian was 12. They had not been partners in any meaningful sense. "My parents weren't," she admitted quietly. "My mother died unhappy. I think that's why she stopped herself." "Why what?" Caleb prompted gently. "Why I can accept this arrangement," she finished. "Better a marriage based on honest practicality than false promises of love that fade." Caleb's expression grew troubled. "Is that what you believe, that love always fades?" "I believe love is a luxury few can afford," Lillian replied, closing the box carefully and handing it back to him. "Especially women with no other options." He accepted the box, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Keep it until Saturday," he said. "Then you can decide if you want to wear it." That night, alone in her room, Lillian opened the box again and examined the ring. It was simple but beautifully crafted, with a pattern of small leaves etched into the gold. She slipped it onto her finger, surprised by how perfectly it fit. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different kind of marriage, one built on affection and mutual desire rather than obligation and necessity. She removed the ring quickly, placing it back in its box. Such fantasies were dangerous. She had agreed to this arrangement with clear eyes and a practical heart. Better to focus on building a functioning partnership than yearning for something as unreliable as love. Friday dawned clear and bright, with a crispness in the air that spoke of the mountain's proximity. Lillian rose early again and found Mrs. Holloway already in the kitchen. "There you are, dear," the older woman greeted her. "After breakfast, we'll start on your dress. Not much time before tomorrow." The day passed in a flurry of activity. Lillian and Mrs. Holloway worked together on the simple cream-colored dress, which turned out to be more elegant than Lillian had expected. The fabric had a subtle pattern woven into it, and Mrs. Holloway added delicate lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Caleb was absent for most of the day, having ridden to a neighboring ranch to help with a difficult calving, according to Thomas. Lillian found herself watching the road for his return more often than she cared to admit, in the late afternoon, while Mrs. Holloway put the finishing touches on the dress. Lillian wandered outside. The sun was beginning to lower toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the yard. She followed a small path that led behind the barn to a rise overlooking a creek. There, to her surprise, she found a small plot surrounded by a white picket fence. Inside were two graves, each marked with a simple wooden cross. Fresh wildflowers had been placed on both. "My parents," Caleb's voice came from behind her. Lillian turned to find him standing a few feet away, his hat in his hands. His clothes were dusty from the day's work, but he had clearly just washed his face and hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," he assured her. "I come here sometimes to think. To remember them." "The flowers are beautiful," she observed. "I bring them when I can," he said, moving to stand beside her at the fence. "They've been gone 10 years now. Influenza took them both within a week of each other." "That must have been terribly difficult," Lillian said softly. Caleb nodded, his gaze on the graves. "I was 22. Had to learn fast how to run the place on my own. Your father's loan came the next year when I was about to lose everything." "He never told me," Lillian admitted. About this place, not until his letter." "Would it have made a difference?" Caleb asked, turning to look at her. "If you had known about me before," Lillian considered the question honestly, "I don't know, perhaps I wouldn't have been so afraid to come." "Are you still afraid?" His voice was gentle, his eyes searching her face. "Less than I was," she admitted. "But tomorrow we become husband and wife and we're still essentially strangers." "Then let's be less strange to each other," he suggested. "Ask me anything you want to know." Lillian was taken aback by the offer. "Anything, he confirmed. "If we're to build a life together, even a practical one, we should know each other better." They walked back toward the house slowly, stopping at a fallen log near the creek. As they sat side by side, Lillian found herself asking questions she hadn't planned about his childhood, his dreams for the ranch, his favorite books from the shelf in the main room. In turn, he asked about her life in Boston, her education, her interests. The conversation flowed more easily than she had expected, and several times she found herself laughing at his dry observations about frontier life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, she realized they had been talking for over an hour. "We should head back," Caleb said reluctantly. "Mrs. Holloway will be wondering where we've gone." As they walked, he hesitated, then asked, "Do you have any questions about tomorrow night?" After the wedding, Lillian felt heat rush to her face. "I understand what marriage entails, Mr. Xavier." "Caleb," he reminded her gently, "and I only meant to reassure you that I don't expect. That is, we can take time to become more comfortable with each other first." His consideration surprised and touched her. "Thank you," she said softly. "I appreciate that." When they reached the house, Mrs. Holloway was waiting with the completed dress. "Just in time for a final fitting," she announced, shooing Caleb away. "No seeing the bride in her dress before the wedding." Later that night, after everyone had retired, Lillian stood by her window, looking out at the stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Caleb Xavier. The thought no longer filled her with dread, but with a cautious hope that perhaps this arrangement might grow into something more than mere convenience, if not love, then at least friendship and mutual respect. She opened the small wooden box and looked at the ring again. She would wear it tomorrow, she decided. Not as a symbol of love, perhaps, but as a sign of her commitment to building something worthwhile in this wild, beautiful place. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunshine, and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for a wedding, Mrs. Holloway declared as she helped Lillian dress. The cream-colored dress fit beautifully, emphasizing her slender waist and complementing her honey-brown hair, which Mrs. Holloway arranged with wildflowers instead of a veil. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said, stepping back to admire her work. "Absolutely lovely." A knock at the door announced Thomas, come to tell them that Pastor Williams had arrived from town. Lillian's heart began to race as the reality of the moment struck her. In a few minutes, she would be making vows to a man she had known for only 3 days. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Holloway asked gently. Lillian took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." The ceremony was to take place in the main room of the house, which had been transformed with bouquets of wildflowers. As Lillian entered, she saw that several neighbors had come to witness the event, families from nearby ranches, who greeted her with warm smiles and curious eyes. And then she saw Caleb standing beside Pastor Williams near the fireplace. He wore a clean black coat over a white shirt, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. When he turned and saw her, his eyes widened slightly, and something like wonder crossed his features. As she walked toward him, Lillian felt a flutter in her chest that she hadn't expected. This handsome, serious man was about to become her husband. For the first time, the thought made her pulse quicken with something other than anxiety. The ceremony was simple and brief. Pastor Williams spoke of duty and partnership, of building a home and a life together. When the time came to exchange rings, Caleb produced not only his mother's band, but also a second ring, a man's wedding band that had belonged to his father. "I, Caleb, take you, Lillian, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his deep voice steady as he slid the ring onto her finger. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Lillian repeated the vows, surprised by the emotion that threatened to choke her as she placed the ring on Caleb's finger. His hand was warm and strong, and he squeezed her fingers gently when she finished speaking. "By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Williams declared. "You may kiss your bride." For a moment, Lillian thought Caleb might simply bow or perhaps kiss her cheek, but he stepped closer, his eyes asking a silent question. When she gave a slight nod, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was brief but undeniably tender. A cheer went up from the assembled guests, and then they were surrounded by well-wishers. Mrs. Holloway had prepared a feast, and the afternoon passed in a blur of introductions, congratulations, and shared food and drink. Lillian found herself warming to the frontier hospitality. These people had come miles to welcome her, bringing gifts of preserves, handmade quilts, and practical items for their household. They told stories about Caleb that made her see him in a new light, how he had helped the Johnsons rebuild after a fire, how he had ridden through a blizzard to fetch the doctor when old Mr. Peterson was ill, how he had taught the Collins boys to read when they couldn't attend the distant schoolhouse. Throughout the celebration, Caleb remained close to her side, his hand occasionally touching the small of her back or her elbow, guiding her, introducing her, making sure she was comfortable. These small gestures of consideration affected her more deeply than she had expected. As evening approached, the guests began to depart. Mrs. Holloway, who would stay in town for the next few days to give the newlyweds privacy, hugged Lillian tightly before leaving. "You'll do just fine, dear," she whispered. "He's a good man, and I can see he's already half in love with you, whether he knows it or not." Lillian flushed at the words, not daring to believe them. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Holloway." Finally, they were alone. The house seemed oddly quiet after the day's festivities. Caleb stood by the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "There's plenty of food left." "No, thank you," Lillian replied, suddenly acutely aware of their solitude and what traditionally followed a wedding. Caleb seemed to sense her nervousness. "Would you like to sit outside for a while? The sunset should be spectacular tonight." Grateful for the suggestion, Lillian nodded. They settled on the simple bench beside the front door, looking out over the valley as the sun began to sink toward the mountains. "Are you disappointed?" Caleb asked after a comfortable silence. "With the wedding, I mean, I know it wasn't what a Boston lady might expect." "No," Lillian said truthfully, "it was perfect. The people here have been so kind and welcoming." "They're good neighbors," Caleb agreed. "Out here you have to be." No one survives alone. They watched the sunset in companionable silence, the sky blazing with color before gradually fading to deep blue. The first stars were just becoming visible when Caleb spoke again. "Lillian, about tonight?" He hesitated, clearly searching for the right words. "I meant what I said yesterday. We can take time to know each other better first." Lillian turned to look at him, his face illuminated by the last light of day and the warm glow from the windows behind them. She was touched by his consideration, but also aware of a new feeling stirring within her, not just gratitude, but attraction to this thoughtful, honorable man. "What if," she said carefully, "we begin as husband and wife in truth, but agree to move slowly, to learn each other as we go?" Caleb's eyes darkened as he studied her face. "Is that what you want?" "I think," Lillian said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed, "that I would like to try building something real between us. Not just a partnership of convenience, but a true marriage in all ways." Caleb reached out slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. "I would like that too," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I expected to." When he kissed her this time, it was different from the brief touch of lips during the ceremony. This kiss held promise and discovery, gentle but with an underlying current of desire that made Lillian's heart race. Later, in the privacy of what was now their shared bedroom, Caleb was as good as his word. He was patient and gentle, guiding her with tender words and careful touches. What began as nervous uncertainty transformed gradually into something. Lillian had never expected pleasure and connection that transcended the physical act itself. Afterward, lying in his arms, Lillian marveled at the strange path that had brought her to this moment. 3 days ago, she had stepped off a stagecoach expecting a cold arrangement of convenience. Now, she was beginning to hope for something she had long ago decided was beyond her reach. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That life takes unexpected turns," she replied honestly. "And that sometimes what seems like an ending might actually be a beginning." Caleb tightened his arms around her. I want you to be happy here, Lillian. I'll do everything I can to make that happen. I think I could be, she whispered, surprising herself with the truth of the words. I really think I could be. The days following their wedding fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Lillian took over the household accounts as promised, impressing Caleb with her efficiency and attention to detail. She began learning the routines of the ranch, gradually taking on responsibilities that had previously been Mrs. Holloway's domain. Caleb, for his part, made efforts to include Lillian in aspects of ranch life that interested her. He taught her to ride better, as her Boston riding lessons had hardly prepared her for western saddles and mountain trails. He showed her the cattle operation, explaining his breeding program and his vision for expanding the herd. In the evenings, they often sat together on the bench outside, watching the sunset and talking about their days. Sometimes they read aloud to each other from the books in Caleb's collection. Other times, they simply sat in comfortable silence, the space between them gradually diminishing as they grew more at ease with casual touches and affectionate gestures. At night, they continued to discover each other with increasing confidence and deepening pleasure. Lillian found herself looking forward to these intimate moments when Caleb's usual reserve melted away and he showed her with actions what he still struggled to express in words. One evening, about 2 weeks after the wedding, they rode to the top of a ridge overlooking the entire valley. The double X spread out below them, cattle dotting the green pastures, the ranch house a haven of civilization amid the wilderness. It's breathtaking, Lillian said, taking in the vista. You've built something remarkable here. Caleb corrected gently. It's ours now, not just mine. The simple statement affected Lillian deeply. Do you truly see it that way? As ours, Caleb turned to her, his expression serious. I do. These past weeks you've become essential to this place, to me. Something in his tone made her heart quicken. Caleb, before she could continue, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted them. Caleb glanced at the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering with alarming speed. We need to get back, he said urgently. Spring storms can turn dangerous quickly out here. They rode swiftly back toward the ranch, but the storm moved faster. The wind picked up, bending the tall grasses and sending dust swirling around them. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall when they were still a mile from home. There's a line shack just over that rise, Caleb shouted over the wind. We won't make it to the house before this hits full force. The small cabin was basic but solid, a single room with a bed, a table, and a small stove. Caleb quickly got a fire going while Lillian used a blanket to dry their horses, which they had brought inside out of the worsening storm. Outside, the rain was now coming down in sheets, drumming on the roof and obscuring the landscape beyond the single small window. Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that shook the cabin. We'll have to wait it out, Caleb said, helping Lillian out of her wet coat. Are you cold? She was shivering, her dress damp from the brief exposure to the rain. A little, she admitted. Caleb found a worn but clean shirt hanging from a peg and handed it to her. Change into this, I'll turn around. Lillian changed quickly, the soft flannel of Caleb's shirt falling to her mid-thigh. When she told him he could turn around, something flashed in his eyes at the sight of her in his clothing. Better, he asked, his voice lower than usual. Much, she replied, suddenly very aware of their isolation and the intimate confines of the cabin. Caleb added more wood to the stove, then spread their wet outer garments nearby to dry. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind howling around the corners of the cabin. Reminds me of when I was a boy, Caleb said, settling on the edge of the narrow bed and gesturing for Lillian to join him. My father and I got caught in a blizzard once, had to hole up in this very cabin for 2 days. Lillian sat beside him, drawn to his warmth and the comfort of his presence amid the storm's fury. Were you afraid? Not with him there, Caleb replied. He knew exactly what to do. Told me stories to pass the time, made it feel like an adventure rather than a disaster. He sounds wonderful, Lillian said softly. He was. My mother too, they loved each other deeply. Caleb looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. I always hoped to find what they had. The confession hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Lillian reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. When I arrived here, she said carefully, I told you this marriage was for convenience. And I said it wasn't for my heart, Caleb finished, his eyes never leaving hers. I think, Lillian whispered, we might both have been wrong. For a moment, Caleb was still, searching her face as if to confirm he had heard correctly. Then he cupped her cheek with his free hand, his touch reverent. Lillian, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. I never expected to feel this way. When I agreed to marry you, it was out of duty to your father and because I needed a partner for this ranch, but these past weeks. Yes. She prompted when he faltered. These past weeks have shown me what I was missing, what we could have together if you want it too. I do want it, Lillian admitted, her heart pounding with the significance of the moment. I came here expecting a business arrangement, but I've found so much more. I've found you. The kiss that followed was different from any they had shared before, deeper, more urgent, filled with newfound honesty and dawning love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the storm outside seemed to echo the tumult of emotion within the cabin. I think I'm falling in love with you, Lillian Xavier, Caleb said, the words both a confession and a promise. Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. And I with you, she whispered. Something I never thought possible. They made love there in the line shack, with the storm raging around them, not the careful, considerate coupling of their early days, but a passionate claiming of each other that left them both trembling and transformed. Afterward, they lay entwined on the narrow bed, listening as the storm gradually moved on, leaving a gentle rain in its wake. Do you regret it? Caleb asked softly. Coming here, marrying me? Lillian raised herself on one elbow to look at him properly. Not for a moment, she said firmly. It may have begun as an arrangement of convenience, but what's growing between us is real, more real than anything I've known before. Caleb smiled, a full, uninhibited smile that transformed his features and made Lillian's heart skip. When the rain stops, he said, I'll take you home, our home. By the time they returned to the ranch house, the sun was breaking through the clouds, turning the raindrops clinging to the grass into diamonds. Thomas and the other hands had managed fine in their absence, though they'd been worried when the storm hit. That night, as they lay in their bed, Caleb propped himself up on one elbow, studying Lillian's face in the soft lamplight. I have something to confess, he said, his expression serious though his eyes held warmth. What is it? Lillian asked, suddenly concerned. The day you arrived, when you said this marriage was for convenience, it hurt more than I expected it to. Lillian reached up to touch his face. I'm sorry, I was afraid then, afraid to hope for more. I understand that now, he said. But the truth is, from the moment I received your father's letter telling me of his illness and asking me to honor my promise, I began to hope for something I hadn't allowed myself to want before. What was that? Lillian asked softly. A true partner. Someone to share not just this ranch, but my life. His voice lowered to a near whisper. When you stepped down from that stagecoach, looking so brave despite everything you'd been through, I felt something I wasn't prepared for. And what did you feel? She prompted, her heart racing. Possibility, he answered simply. The possibility that this arrangement might become something more, that my heart, which I'd claimed wasn't part of our deal, was already involved whether I wanted it to be or not. Lillian felt tears gather in her eyes. Why didn't you say something? You'd been through enough, lost your father, your home, everything familiar. The last thing you needed was pressure from a stranger with unexpected feelings. He smiled ruefully. Besides, I've never been good with words. You're doing quite well now, Lillian teased gently, leaning up to kiss him. The spring turned to summer, and with it came a transformation of the land and of their relationship. The pastures grew lush with grass for the cattle. Wildflowers carpeted the hillsides, and the creek ran full and clear from the mountain snowmelt. Lillian's knowledge of the ranch and its operations grew daily. She learned to help with the cattle when needed, discovered she had a talent for gardening in the challenging mountain climate, and continued to manage the accounts with skill and foresight. Her relationship with Caleb deepened as well. The reserved, dutiful man who had met her stagecoach was still there, but alongside him emerged a tender, passionate husband who increasingly found ways to express his growing love, sometimes with words, more often with actions. In July, when the wildflowers were at their peak, Caleb surprised her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Lillian asked, turning the parcel over in her hands. "Open it," he urged, a rare boyish excitement in his expression. Inside was a small leather-bound journal with her initials stamped in gold on the cover. "I noticed you writing letters sometimes," Caleb explained, "but I thought perhaps you might want to record your thoughts about this place, our life here." The storekeeper in Silver Creek ordered it special from Denver. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Lillian rose on tiptoe to kiss him. "It's perfect, thank you." That evening, she began writing in the journal, recording not just the events of ranch life but her feelings as she adjusted to her new home and the unexpected joy she had found in her marriage. She wrote of Caleb's kindness, his strength, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the feel of his hands on her skin in the darkness of their bedroom. In August, they traveled to Silver Creek for the town's summer festival. It was Lillian's first return to town since her arrival, and she was surprised by how different it looked through her now accustomed eyes. What had seemed dusty and primitive on her arrival now appeared charming and full of life. The townsfolk welcomed her warmly as Mrs. Xavier, many remembering her from the wedding or from Caleb's descriptions during his supply runs. Mrs. Holloway made a special fuss, introducing her to everyone who hadn't made it to the wedding. During the dancing that evening, Caleb led Lillian onto the makeshift dance floor in the town square. Though not naturally graceful, he moved with the same quiet confidence he showed in all things, holding her with gentle firmness as they swayed to the fiddle music. "Happy?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. Later that night, as they made the journey back to the ranch by moonlight, Lillian felt a deep contentment settle within her. This land that had seemed so alien just months ago had become home. This man who had been a stranger was now the center of her world. In early September, Lillian began to suspect she was with child. Her monthly courses were late, and certain foods that she had previously enjoyed now turned her stomach. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, not wanting to raise hopes until she was more certain. One morning, as Lillian was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, she was overcome by a sudden wave of dizziness. She gripped the post supporting the line, trying to steady herself as black spots danced before her eyes. "Lillian." Caleb's voice came from behind her, followed immediately by his strong hands gripping her shoulders. "What's wrong?" "Just a bit dizzy," she managed to say as the world slowly righted itself. "I'm fine now." Caleb's face was creased with concern. "You're pale as a sheet. Come inside and sit down." He led her to the kitchen and poured her a glass of water, then knelt before her chair, his eyes searching her face. "This isn't the first time, is it?" he asked, his perceptiveness surprising her. "You've been tired lately, and I noticed you barely touched your breakfast this morning." Lillian took a deep breath, realizing the moment had come. "No, it's not the first time, Caleb, I think. That is, I'm fairly certain that I'm going to have a baby." For a moment, he was absolutely still, his expression frozen in surprise. Then a smile broke across his face, more radiant than any she had seen before. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Our baby," Lillian nodded, smiling through the tears that had suddenly filled her eyes. "Yes, our baby, probably sometime in the spring if my calculations are correct." Caleb reached for her hands, gripping them tightly. "Are you happy about this?" he asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. "I know we haven't discussed children yet, and I'm very happy," Lillian interrupted, squeezing his hands reassuringly. Surprised, a little frightened perhaps, but very, very happy. Caleb stood and pulled her gently to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "A family," he murmured against her hair. "We're going to be a family." The word resonated within Lillian's heart. Family. Something she had lost with her father's death. Something she had never expected to find again. Certainly not so soon and so completely. As autumn painted the countryside in brilliant golds and reds, Caleb became even more protective of Lillian. He insisted she rest more, hired a local girl to help with the household chores, and began making plans to expand the house. "We'll need another bedroom," he explained as they reviewed his rough sketches one evening. "And I thought we might add a proper dining room and enlarge the kitchen." "We don't need to do all that before the baby comes," Lillian protested, though she was touched by his enthusiasm. "Not all at once," he agreed, "but I want to start now. This place was built for a single man, now it needs to be a family home." The word still gave Lillian a warm glow whenever she heard it. Family. Her family with Caleb. In late October, when the first snow dusted the highest peaks, Caleb received a letter that brought a shadow of concern to his face. "What is it?" Lillian asked, noting his troubled expression as he read. "Cattle rustlers," he replied grimly. "They've hit 3 ranches north of here in the past month, sheriffs warning everyone to be on alert." "Are they likely to come this far south?" Lillian asked, a flutter of anxiety in her chest. "Hard to say. But I'll talk to the hands about increasing patrols." He set the letter aside and took her hand. "Don't worry, we'll be careful." Despite his reassurance, Lillian noticed Caleb's increased vigilance in the days that followed. He spent more time riding the boundaries of their property and taught Lillian how to use the rifle he kept for protection. "Just in case," he said as she practiced aiming at a target he had set up. "Though I pray you'll never need to use it." November brought colder weather and preparations for winter. The harvest from Lillian's garden was preserved in jars that lined the cellar shelves. Firewood was stacked high beside the house. The cattle were moved to the lower pastures where they would be easier to feed once snow covered the land. Lillian's pregnancy began to show, a gentle rounding of her previously flat abdomen. Caleb took to placing his hand there in the evenings as they sat by the fire, his expression one of wonder when he felt the first fluttering movements of their child. "He's going to be strong," Caleb predicted one night, his palm warm against her belly. "You're so certain it's a boy," Lillian teased, or she, Caleb amended with a smile. "Either way, our child will be strong and brave, like their mother. And kind and honorable." "Like their father," Lillian added softly. Caleb's expression grew serious. "I want to be a good father, like mine was to me." "You will be," Lillian assured him, covering his hand with her own. "You already love this child so much." "As I love you," he said simply, the words no longer difficult for him to express. The first major snowfall came in early December, transforming the landscape overnight into a white wonderland. Lillian stood at the window, watching as Caleb and the ranch hands cleared paths between the buildings and checked on the livestock. The beauty of the snow-covered mountains took her breath away. How different her life was now from what she had imagined when she received her father's letter nearly a year ago. Instead of a cold arrangement of convenience, she had found love, purpose, and a home. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Caleb seemed unusually quiet. "Is something wrong?" Lillian asked, brushing her hair at the dressing table. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, watching her. "No, just thinking about Christmas. It will be our first together." "Yes," Lillian said with a smile. "I've been planning a special dinner. Mrs. Holloway gave me her recipe for plum pudding." "I've been thinking about a gift for you," Caleb continued. "But nothing seems adequate." Lillian set down her brush and went to sit beside him. "You've given me everything, Caleb. A home, a future, this child. What more could I possibly want?" He took her hand, his expression earnest. "When you arrived, you said this marriage was for convenience. I want you to know that it's become the greatest blessing of my life." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "And mine," she whispered. "I never expected to find such happiness here." Caleb reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package. I was going to save this for Christmas, but I want you to have it now. Inside the package was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. When Lillian opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Caleb on one side. The other side was empty. For the baby, he explained. When he or she arrives, we'll add their portrait too. It's beautiful, Lillian said, tears now flowing freely. Will you help me put it on? Caleb fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. I love you, Lillian Xavier, he said, his voice rough with emotion. More than I ever thought possible. And I love you, she replied, turning to face him, with all my heart. Christmas at the Double X Ranch was a joyous affair. Despite the snow that isolated them somewhat, neighbors made the journey to exchange gifts and share meals. The house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and a small tree stood in the corner of the main room, adorned with candles and simple ornaments. On Christmas Eve, after their guests had departed, Caleb and Lillian sat before the fire enjoying a rare moment of complete peace. What are you thinking? Caleb asked, noticing her contemplative expression. About last Christmas, Lillian replied. I was alone in Boston, mourning my father, uncertain of my future. And now here I am with you, with our child growing inside me. It's like a dream I never dared to have. Caleb drew her closer against his side. Not a dream, our reality. The new year brought increased concern about the rustlers. Reports indicated they were moving southward, and a ranch just 20 miles north had lost a dozen head in early January. I'm increasing the night patrols, Caleb told Lillian one evening. Thomas and Jim will take turns watching the north pasture where the best breeding stock is kept. Is there anything I can do? Lillian asked, worried by the lines of tension around his eyes. Just be vigilant. Keep the doors locked when I'm not here. He placed a hand on her rounded abdomen. And take care of yourself and our little one. January passed without incident, lulling them into a cautious hope that the rustlers had moved on. February brought milder weather with occasional thaws that hinted at the coming spring. Lillian's pregnancy progressed well. Dr. Patterson from Silver Creek visited twice, pronouncing both mother and child healthy and strong. The baby's room was prepared with a cradle Caleb had crafted himself and soft blankets sent by well-wishing neighbors. In late February, Caleb needed to ride to a ranch 2 days' journey away to look at a bull he was considering purchasing for his breeding program. I don't like leaving you, he said as he prepared for the journey. Not with the baby coming in just a couple of months. We'll be fine, Lillian assured him. Thomas and Jim will be here, and Mrs. Holloway promised to stay with me while you're gone. Still, she felt a strange uneasiness as she watched him ride away, Thomas accompanying him for the first leg of the journey before he would return to help Jim watch over the ranch. The first day passed uneventfully. Mrs. Holloway arrived mid-morning, bringing fresh bread and cheerful conversation. They spent the day preparing baby clothes and discussing names for the child. Have you and Caleb decided? Mrs. Holloway asked as they stitched tiny gowns. If it's a boy, Charles, after Caleb's father, Lillian replied. If a girl, Margaret, after my mother. Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. Fine names, both of them. Strong names. That night, Lillian had trouble sleeping, missing Caleb's warm presence beside her. She finally drifted off near dawn, only to be awakened a few hours later by the sound of urgent voices. She dressed quickly and found Thomas in the kitchen, his expression grim as he spoke to Jim and Mrs. Holloway. What's happened? Lillian asked, fear clutching at her heart. Rustlers, Thomas replied. They hit during the night, took at least 20 head from the north pasture. Was anyone hurt? Lillian's hand went protectively to her abdomen. No, madam, but they cut the fence and drove the cattle through the gap. Jim discovered it at first light. Lillian took a deep breath, steadying herself. Send someone to find Caleb, he needs to know. Already done, madam. Pete rode out as soon as we discovered the theft. Good. Lillian moved to the stove, her mind racing. We should prepare food for when they return. They'll be hungry and tired. Mrs. Holloway looked at her with approval. Yes, they will. I'll start the bread. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Lillian kept herself busy helping Mrs. Holloway prepare food and assisting Thomas and Jim as they repaired the cut fence and counted the remaining cattle. As dusk approached, Lillian began to worry. Pete should have found Caleb by now and they should be on their way back. What if something had happened to them? She was standing on the porch, straining to see down the road when Mrs. Holloway joined her. "They'll come, dear," the older woman said gently. "Caleb won't rest until he's back at your side." "I know," Lillian replied. "I just can't help worrying." It was fully dark when they finally heard horses approaching. Lillian's heart leaped as Caleb's familiar form emerged from the darkness, followed by Pete and two other men she didn't recognize. She hurried down the steps as Caleb dismounted, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently, taking her by the shoulders and scanning her face. "I'm fine," she assured him. "We're all fine, just worried about you." Caleb pulled her into a tight embrace, his relief palpable. "When Pete found me and told me what happened, all I could think of was getting back to you." "Who are they?" Lillian asked, nodding toward the strangers who had accompanied Caleb. "Sheriff Davis from the county seat and his deputy," Caleb explained. "They've been tracking these rustlers for weeks." Inside, over the meal Lillian and Mrs. Holloway had prepared, Sheriff Davis explained the situation. "We believe it's a gang of 5 or 6 men, led by a fellow named Harlan Doyle. They've been working their way south, hitting isolated ranches and driving the cattle toward the territorial border." "Why weren't they stopped before now?" Thomas asked, his voice edged with frustration. "Territory's too vast, too few lawmen," the sheriff replied simply. "But we're closing in. The tracks from your place lead southeast. With fresh horses, we might catch them before they cross into New Mexico." "I'm going with you," Caleb said firmly. Lillian's heart sank at his words, though she had expected them. Those cattle represented months of work and a significant investment. More importantly, they were part of the legacy he was building for their child. "When do you leave?" she asked quietly. "First light," Sheriff Davis answered. "Best chance of catching them is to move fast." That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Lillian clung to Caleb, her fears bubbling to the surface. "I'm scared," she admitted. "These men are dangerous." "I know." Caleb stroked her hair soothingly, "but I have to go." "Those cattle aren't just livestock, they're our future, our child's future." "Your safety matters more than any cattle," Lillian insisted. Caleb cupped her face in his hands. "I'll be careful. The sheriff knows what he's doing and will outnumber them. I promise I'll come back to you." Lillian pressed her forehead to his. "You'd better. We're waiting for you." In the gray light of dawn, Lillian watched as Caleb prepared to leave with the sheriff, his deputy, Thomas, and 2 neighboring ranchers who had arrived to join the pursuit. Jim and Pete would remain behind to protect the ranch. 3 days, Caleb told her as he kissed her goodbye. "I'll be back in 3 days, with or without the cattle." Lillian held him tightly for a moment. 3 days, she repeated. "I'll be counting every hour." The first day after Caleb's departure passed slowly. Lillian kept busy with household tasks, trying not to watch the clock or stare down the road. Mrs. Holloway remained with her, a comforting presence whose cheerful conversation provided welcome distraction. The second day brought a spring storm with cold rain that turned occasionally to sleet. Lillian stood at the window, watching the dismal weather and worrying about Caleb exposed to the elements. "He'll find shelter," Mrs. Holloway assured her. "Caleb knows this country better than most." That night, Lillian had trouble sleeping, partly due to the baby's increased activity and partly from anxiety about Caleb. She was dozing fitfully when a sudden pain gripped her abdomen, sharp enough to make her gasp. She sat up, placing a hand on her swollen belly. It was too soon. The baby wasn't due for at least 6 more weeks. The pain subsided, and Lillian told herself it was nothing to worry about, just the normal discomforts of late pregnancy. But an hour later, another pain came, stronger than the first, and then another. With growing alarm, Lillian realized these were not practice contractions but the real thing. The baby was coming, far too early. She managed to make her way to Mrs. Holloway's room, waking the older woman with news that sent her into immediate action. "Jim, Mrs. Holloway called, rousing the ranch hand who was sleeping in the main room. "Ride for Dr. Patterson in Silver Creek. Tell him Mrs. Xavier's baby is coming early." While Jim saddled a horse, Mrs. Holloway helped Lillian back to bed and began gathering clean linens and hot water. "Try to stay calm," she advised, her practical manner reassuring. "Babies sometimes come early and do just fine. My own Thomas was nearly a month early, and look at him now, strong as an ox." The contractions continued through the night, gradually increasing in frequency and intensity. By dawn, Lillian was exhausted, her face pale with pain and fear. "Where's Jim with the doctor?" she asked during a brief respite between contractions. "The storms likely slowed them down," Mrs. Holloway replied, wiping Lillian's forehead with a cool cloth. "But they'll be here soon." Another hour passed, and then another. The contractions were now coming very close together. Mrs. Holloway checked Lillian's progress and nodded decisively. "This baby isn't waiting for the doctor," she announced. "I've delivered plenty of babies in my time. We'll manage just fine." Lillian gripped the older woman's hand. "Caleb should be here," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "He would be if he could," Mrs. Holloway assured her. "But right now you need to focus on bringing this child into the world." The next hour was a blur of pain and effort for Lillian. Mrs. Holloway coached her calmly through each contraction, her experienced hands guiding the process with confidence. And then, with a final push, Lillian's child entered the world, a tiny, perfect girl with a lusty cry that belied her early arrival. "She's beautiful, Mrs. Holloway declared as she cleaned and wrapped the infant. "Small but strong, just like her mother." Tears streamed down Lillian's face as she held her daughter for the first time. The baby had a dusting of dark hair like Caleb's, and when she briefly opened her eyes, they were the same stormy gray. "Margaret," Lillian whispered, running a finger gently along her daughter's cheek. "Margaret Xavier." Dr. Patterson arrived an hour later, having been delayed by the storm and a fallen tree blocking the road. He examined both mother and child thoroughly, his expression growing more relieved as he did so. "She's small, as expected for coming early, but her lungs sound good and her color is excellent," he pronounced. "You'll need to keep her warm and feed her frequently, but I see no reason she shouldn't thrive." "And when can Caleb see his daughter?" Lillian asked, eager to share this joy with her husband. The doctor and Mrs. Holloway exchanged a glance that sent a chill through Lillian's heart. "What is it?" she demanded. "What aren't you telling me?" Dr. Patterson sighed. "There's been trouble, Mrs. Xavier. The rustlers apparently split up after leaving your ranch. The sheriff and his men, including your husband, tracked the main group but were ambushed near the territorial border." Lillian felt the blood drain from her face. "Caleb, he's alive," the doctor assured her quickly. "But he was wounded shot in the shoulder. They brought him to Silver Creek late last night. I treated him before coming here. How serious is it?" Lillian asked, clutching her newborn daughter closer. "The bullet went clean through, which is fortunate. He lost blood, but he's strong. With proper care and time to heal, he should recover fully." The doctor paused. "He was more concerned about you than himself. Kept insisting I come check on you as soon as possible." Relief and anxiety warred within Lillian. Caleb was alive but wounded. He needed her just as their daughter did. "I need to go to him," she said, attempting to sit up further. "Absolutely not," Dr. Patterson countered firmly. "You've just given birth. You need rest. Your husband is being well cared for in town." "Then bring him here," Lillian insisted, "as soon as he's able to travel." The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "If his condition remains stable through the night, we can move him tomorrow." "But only if you promise to rest until then." Lillian agreed, though rest proved elusive as she worried about Caleb while caring for their newborn daughter. Margaret proved to be a determined little soul, nursing well despite her early arrival and sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside Lillian's bed. Mrs. Holloway was a godsend, helping with the baby and ensuring Lillian ate and drank enough to maintain her strength. Jim and Pete took turns riding to town for news of Caleb, returning with reports that he was improving and eager to return home. Finally, late the following day, Lillian heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She was sitting up in bed, Margaret asleep in her arms, when the bedroom door opened and Caleb appeared, supported by Dr. Patterson and Thomas. He was pale, his left arm in a sling, his face drawn with pain and exhaustion. But his eyes, when they fell on Lillian and the tiny bundle she held, filled with such overwhelming emotion that it brought tears to her own. "Lillian," he breathed, moving forward with determination despite his obvious weakness. "And our child." "A daughter," Lillian said, her voice breaking with joy as he reached the bed. "Margaret Xavier, born yesterday morning." Caleb sank carefully onto the edge of the bed, his good arm reaching out to gently touch the baby's cheek. "She's perfect," he whispered. "So tiny but perfect." "Just like her father, she decided to arrive dramatically," Lillian said, smiling through her tears. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. "I'll leave you three alone, but Mr. Xavier, remember what I said, you need rest to heal properly." When the doctor had gone, closing the door behind him, Caleb leaned forward to kiss Lillian tenderly. "I'm sorry I wasn't here." "You're here now," she replied. "That's what matters." With some careful maneuvering, Caleb settled beside her on the bed, his good arm around her shoulders as they both gazed at their sleeping daughter. "Did you recover the cattle?" Lillian asked after a comfortable silence. "Some of them." "And the sheriff captured 3 of the rustlers, including Doyle." Caleb's expression darkened momentarily. "The ambush was unexpected. If Thomas hadn't reacted as quickly as he did, I might not be here." Lillian shuddered at the thought. "I'll have to thank him properly." "I already have," Caleb assured her. "He'll be foreman from now on with a raise in pay." Margaret stirred in Lillian's arms, her tiny face scrunching up before her eyes opened, revealing their stormy gray color. Caleb stared in wonder as his daughter seemed to look directly at him. "She has your eyes," Lillian said softly. "And your determination," Caleb replied, smiling as the baby's small hand closed around his finger. "Coming into the world on her own schedule, not waiting for anyone. The doctor says she's strong despite being early. She just needs extra care and feeding for a while. She'll get it," Caleb promised. "We'll make sure of that." As the evening shadows lengthened, Lillian and Caleb remained together on the bed, their daughter between them, a family united despite the challenges they had faced. Outside, the ranch continued its rhythms, cattle grazing in the pastures, hands going about their tasks, life proceeding as it should. "I never imagined this," Lillian said softly as Margaret nursed contentedly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach less than a year ago, I couldn't have dreamed of such happiness." Caleb's eyes, warm with love, met hers. "Nor could I. When you said this marriage was for convenience, I thought that was all it would ever be." "And you said it wasn't for your heart," Lillian reminded him with a smile. "I was wrong," Caleb admitted, brushing a tender kiss across her forehead. "So very wrong. My heart was yours from the beginning, though I was too stubborn to admit it. Even to yourself," Lillian teased gently. "Especially to myself." His expression grew serious. "I was afraid to want more than a practical arrangement, afraid of being rejected if I did." "And now?" Lillian asked softly. "Now I'm not afraid of anything," Caleb replied, his gaze encompassing both his wife and daughter. "Not as long as I have you both." Spring advanced across the Colorado territory, bringing new growth to the land and healing to those who had weathered the winter's challenges. Caleb's wound healed cleanly, though he would always carry a scar as a reminder of the encounter with the rustlers. Margaret thrived under her parents' devoted care, growing stronger each day despite her early arrival. By May, life at the Double X Ranch had settled into new patterns that accommodated the addition of a baby to the household. Lillian found that motherhood, while demanding, brought her unexpected joy. Caleb proved to be a tender, attentive father who often carried Margaret with him around the ranch, proudly showing her the animals and operations that would someday be her inheritance. On a particularly beautiful evening in late May, Just after Margaret's 3-month birthday, Caleb suggested they ride to the ridge where they had watched the sunset before the fateful storm the previous year. "Are you sure Margaret is old enough?" Lillian asked, glancing at their daughter who was contentedly examining her own fingers in the cradle. "Mrs. Holloway will watch her for a couple of hours," Caleb assured her. "And you haven't been further than the garden since she was born. The fresh air will do you good." The ride to the ridge was invigorating. Lillian had forgotten how much she enjoyed the feel of a horse beneath her and the wind in her hair. When they reached the summit, the valley spread before them in verdant splendor, the ranch buildings neat and solid in the distance, cattle grazing peacefully in the lush pastures. "It looks even more beautiful than I remembered," Lillian commented as Caleb spread a blanket for them to sit on. "It is beautiful," he agreed, settling beside her, "but not as beautiful as what waits for us at home." Lillian leaned against him, content in a way she had never thought possible. "Who would have thought that my father's last request would lead to such happiness?" "He knew," Caleb said thoughtfully. "Perhaps not exactly how things would unfold, but he knew we would be good for each other." "Do you think so?" Lillian asked. Caleb nodded. "In his last letter to me, after telling me about his illness and asking me to honor my promise to look after you, he wrote something that I didn't fully understand at the time." "What was it?" Lillian prompted when Caleb paused. "He wrote, 'She will say it's for convenience, but given time, you'll both discover it's for much more.'" Caleb smiled at the memory. "I thought he meant the practical advantages of our arrangement, you gaining security, me gaining a partner for the ranch, but he meant our hearts." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes at this evidence of her father's insight and care for her future happiness. "He never said a word to me about you being more than a business associate. He must have wanted us to discover each other without expectations." "A wise man," Caleb said softly. "I owe him everything, not just my start in ranching, but you and Margaret as well." They sat in companionable silence as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and rose. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily on the thermal currents, free and at home in the vast Colorado sky. "I've been thinking," Caleb said after a while, "about the future." "What about it?" Lillian asked, turning to look at him. "I want to expand the house again, add more bedrooms." His eyes held a question as they met hers. "For the brothers and sisters Margaret will need as she grows up." Lillian's heart swelled with love for this man who had become everything to her. "I think that's a wonderful idea, though perhaps we should wait a few months before starting on the next one." Caleb laughed, the sound rich and warm in the evening air. "Agreed, but in the meantime I can start on the addition. Thomas has a brother who's a good carpenter." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Lillian reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this place and this life. She had arrived expecting a marriage of convenience, with a stranger a practical arrangement born of necessity and obligation. Instead, she had found a love deeper and truer than any she had thought possible, a family of her own and a home where she truly belonged. At the ranch house, they found Mrs. Holloway rocking a sleeping Margaret on the porch. "She was an angel," the older woman reported. "Just fed her about 20 minutes ago. Should sleep for a while now." After Mrs. Holloway had gone home with Thomas, Caleb and Lillian stood on the porch, their daughter cradled between them, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the evening sky. "Happy?" Caleb asked softly, his arm around Lillian's shoulders. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "And grateful." "For what?" "For this life, for you, for the journey that brought us together." Lillian smiled up at him. "Even for my initial misconception that this marriage was just for convenience." Caleb's eyes, warm in the lantern light spilling from the window behind them, held all the love she could ever want as he bent to kiss her gently. "And for my stubborn insistence that it wasn't for my heart." "Especially for that," Lillian whispered against his lips, "because it made discovering the truth all the sweeter." In her arms, Margaret stirred briefly, then settled again with a contented sigh, Secure in her parents' love and the promise of the future that awaited her on this land, they all called home. And as the night deepened around the Double X Ranch, the Xavier family, born of obligation but bound now by love, stood together on the threshold of all their tomorrows, their hearts united in a bond far stronger than any arrangement of mere convenience could ever be.